Hello, my name is Meg, and today I'm going to teach you how to storytell Bad Moon Rising, aka BMR, the final base script in Blood on the Clocktower. If you're looking for storytelling basics, I have a video for that. First I'll go over some specific BMR storytelling tips, game mechanics, characters, then balancing a game, and then the playthrough. A lot of death or narrowly escaping death will be required to learn information to locate the demon. You cannot wake the demons and the minions together, sad I know, because there's an outsider that prevents this. So we'll get to them, but just to give you a heads up, so don't do it even if that outsider is not in play, use the info tokens. Demons can kill multiple people in the night in this script, which we will cover when we get to the demons, but it's important to know that death happens sequentially, not simultaneously. So if the demon is picking 2 players, they die in the order that the demon selected them. So if one character dying changes the status of another, that matters. So if the demon picks player 1 and player 2 is protecting player 1, then the demon will only kill player 2 because player 2 is protecting them when the demon passed over player 1. I will give specific examples when we get to the demons. My storytelling tips for BMR are to double, triple, quadruple check your grimoire before you end the night and before you wake every character. There are so many ways that people can die. You don't want to accidentally wake someone who should be dead, and you also don't want to accidentally kill someone who should have been protected. There's also lots of drunkenness, so make sure you're giving drunk information where you want to. I figure most people watching this are familiar with the basic rules in trouble brewing, but just in case, remember that drunkenness and poisoning means that your ability doesn't work, but you should always act like it's working, and people might get false information. So if someone is drunk or poisoned and they're a player who wakes at night and does things, you should pretend that they are doing something, but they're actually not having an effect on the game. Information learners might get false information, but usually I will give them false information because it's more fun, and drunkenness is there for a reason, to balance the game. Also, drunkenness and poisoning mean the exact same thing, so if I say if so-and-so is drunk, then the same would be true if so-and-so is poisoned. It's just that drunkenness usually comes from good characters, and poisoning usually comes from evil characters. Roll call. I'm going to go out of order here and talk about a minion first. The assassin's ability is that they can kill once per game, and that player would die even if for some reason they couldn't. I say this now because I'm going to be saying assassin exception a lot. And now back to our regular programming. The grandmother. You start knowing a good player and their character. If the demon kills them, you die too. So before the first night, select who the grandchild will be. It can be any good player, townsfolk or outsider. A popular pick is a powerful role, such as the Exorcist, the Professor, or the Chambermaid. If the demon kills the grandchild, not death by any other means, the grandmother dies as well. If the grandmother dies on their own, nothing happens to the grandchild. So you'll wake the grandmother, show them the grandchild token, then point to the player that is their grandchild. Then you will show them the character token of what that player is. If the grandmother was drunk on night 1, I would show them their grandchild and then show them an incorrect token. If drunk later, then the demon killing the grandchild would not cause the grandmother's death. The sailor. Each night, choose an alive player. Either you or they are drunk until dusk. You can't die. So the sailor can't die unless they are drunk or the assassin exception. So you will wake the sailor and they will pick someone. Then decide who becomes drunk. It's entirely up to you. Typically, if they pick a townsfolk, you make the townsfolk drunk. If they pick anybody else, then you make the sailor drunk so that if they die, they might figure out that they did not pick a townsfolk. But that's entirely up to you. It just seems to be what most people do and what the manual suggests you do. This character is a little odd to me because the ability to gain info comes from metagaming what the storyteller is encouraged to do. Drunk townsfolk and drunk the sailor if they don't pick a townsfolk. But most players haven't read the manual, so I don't know how they're supposed to know that. But do what you like. You're the storyteller. As I always say, use your best judgment. If the demon picked the sailor, then in the morning you will announce that nobody died, but you won't say why. If the sailor is executed, you will announce that they're executed, but they don't die. A drunk sailor will die and can't make anyone drunk. The Chambermaid. Each night, choose 2 alive players, not yourself. You learn how many woke tonight due to their ability. So you'll wake the Chambermaid and they'll choose 2 alive players. If neither of them woke, you'll give them a 0. If one of them woke, you'll give them a 1. And if both of them woke, you'll give them a 2. You can't let them pick a dead player, so be very mindful of that, especially if somebody has just died. Then you might not have a shroud on their token yet, so you might forget. So make sure that they are only choosing alive players. If the Chambermaid makes an invalid choice, just shake your head and they must try again. The Chambermaid will find out in the morning that that person died, so you don't have to hide it from them. If they're very confused as to why they can't pick that person, just signal that the person died. The Chambermaid reads people who woke due to their ability, not to a non-ability. So for example, the demons and the minions waking up in the beginning to learn their bluffs and who each other are, that does not count. The Chambermaid will not read that. A drunk Chambermaid would get incorrect information. So let's say they pick the player who is the sailor and the player who is the grandmother. It's night 2, so the grandmother would not wake on night 2, but you show your Chambermaid a 2 anyway. The Exorcist. Each night choose a player, different to last night. The demon, if chosen, learns who you are, then doesn't wake tonight. So you'll wake the Exorcist and they will choose someone. If they don't choose the demon, nothing happens. If they do pick the demon, put the Exorcist to sleep, wake the demon, show them the "this character selected you" token, and then the Exorcist token. Then point to the player that is the Exorcist. A drunk demon would get true information on who the Exorcist is, because this is due to the Exorcist's ability, not the demon's ability. A drunk Exorcist would pick someone and nothing would happen either way. The Exorcist doesn't learn if they pick the demon, so the demon won't wake, but the Exorcist won't know for sure if they're the one that prevented them from killing. Not to jump back to the Chambermaid, but if the demon woke to learn who the Exorcist is, that would be the Exorcist's ability, not the demon's ability. The demon would not wake that night, and the Chambermaid would not read that the demon woke. The Innkeeper. Each night choose 2 players. They can't die tonight, but one is drunk until dusk. So you'll wake the Innkeeper, they will choose 2 players, and they can't die tonight, but they could still be executed and die in the day. Then choose who will be drunk. They will be drunk until dusk, so for tonight and until the end of the next day. You'll notice the Innkeeper acts early in the night. Typically the night's order is protection rolls, killing rolls, information gatherers, and other doers. For example, let's say the Innkeeper chooses the Chambermaid and the Exorcist. So you decide to make the Exorcist drunk. The demon attacks the Chambermaid, but the Chambermaid doesn't die. Assassin exception. If the assassin attacks an Innkeeper protected person, they will die. Another example, the Innkeeper chooses the Chambermaid and themselves. You decide to make the Innkeeper drunk. The demon attacks the Chambermaid, and because the Innkeeper is drunk and can't protect anyone, the Chambermaid dies. So yes, the Innkeeper can choose themselves, and if they are drunk from their own ability or from somebody else's ability, they can't save anyone. Typically, if the Innkeeper chooses themselves, the normal thing to do is to drunk the Innkeeper. If the Innkeeper chooses 2 evil players, then drunk whoever would balance the game more. If they pick 2 goods, also, whichever one would balance the game. If they pick an evil and a good player, then again, whichever one would balance the game. If one side is winning, then I would drunk that player. Typically, you're going to drunk the good player because that's the price they're paying for protection, and there are way more good characters. So it's more than likely you will need to hinder the good team in order to balance the game. But it totally depends on your game, totally depends on what you're feeling. Use your best judgment. The Gambler. Each night choose a player and guess their character. If you guess wrong, you die. So wake the Gambler and they will point at someone. Then they will point to a character on their script that they think that person is. Do not tell the Gambler if they're correct or not, just put them to sleep. If they're correct, they live. If they're not, they die. They don't know if they're correct, so it's always possible they died from some other means, like the demon kills them, which is all part of spreading the BMR cheer. For example, the Gambler chooses the Chambermaid player, then they point to the Chambermaid on their script. They're correct, so they don't die. Then the next night, they choose the Assassin, who is bluffing as the Exorcist, so the Gambler chooses the Exorcist on their sheet, but of course that is wrong, so they die. If the Gambler's drunk, then guessing wrong doesn't do anything. The Gossip. Each day, you make a public statement. Tonight, if it was true, a player dies. So during the day, after private chats have ended and everybody's back in the town square, ask if anybody would like to gossip, even if you don't have a gossip in play. Anybody can gossip, but they can't just mumble or make a random side statement. They need to say, "I am the gossip and I am gossiping, blah 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 blah," and wait until you call on them if multiple people are gossiping. So the player must be in the spotlight when they gossip. There is a reminder token for correct gossip, so either hang around your grimoire, but whatever you do, make sure that you are paying attention equally to everybody's gossip so that you don't reveal who the actual gossip is by ignoring everybody else and only paying attention to the actual gossip. For example, after someone gossips, you can say, "Gossip heard," or "Okay," and nod in their direction. Or you can be extra and say, "The gods have heard your predictions and the ground shakes with a murmur of rumors spreading." You can do what you like, just make sure that you treat each gossip with the same seriousness. The gossip might also make a very specific statement. For example, they could say, "I gossip that 3 players are drunk right now. So for that reason, it's also a good idea to be by your grimoire so you can check." If the gossip is drunk when they make a true statement, then at night they are sober when their ability would trigger, a player would die. So you need to pay attention to their gossip regardless, because it depends on if they are drunk when their ability would trigger. Of course, if they're drunk when the ability triggers, nobody dies, and if they make a false statement, nobody dies. Who should you kill? Well, I suggest don't sync gossip kills. Don't use the gossip to target somebody who's protected, because this is the only way that the gossip can learn information, and that's kinda lame. I will usually kill a good player just because there's more good players, but if evil's really winning or we're near the end of the game and there's a lot of evils alive, then I might kill an evil player. Use your best judgment. The Courtier. Once per game at night, choose a character. They are drunk for 3 nights and 3 days. This is once per game, and usually the Courtier doesn't want to use it immediately, so they can shake their head no until they want to use it. Once they do, they point to a character on their character sheet. They do not pick a player. I've seen lots of mistakes like that. They pick a character. The player that is the character that the Courtier selected is now drunk, and if that character was not in play, then nothing happens, which is why the Courtier typically wants to wait to use their ability. So because this is so powerful, but they only get to use it once, if they are a new player, I will make sure they understand that they can say no until they want to use it. Usually if I'm explaining the rules in the beginning, I will say, if you are a once per game ability user, when I wake you up, I will kind of shrug my shoulders, indicating, do you want to use it? And they can just say no until they want to. There is a drunk 1, a drunk 2, and a drunk 3 reminder token, so switch it at the beginning of each night to remember how long it has been. Typically the Courtier will choose an evil character, but they don't have to. There are reasons to pick an outsider, for example, to stop their ability from causing chaos, or if somebody is bluffing a townsfolk and you don't believe them, then the Courtier might choose to make them drunk to see if their story changes. So never question a Courtier's choice, but typically they will pick a demon or a minion. If the Courtier is drunk and decides to pick a character, then that character is not made drunk, even if the Courtier later becomes sober, because their ability only triggers once when they decide to pick the character, and they were drunk when they decided to pick. If the Courtier successfully made a character drunk, and then later the Courtier becomes drunk, the drunkenness on the character they chose will temporarily pause until the Courtier is sober again. Then that character's drunkenness would resume. For example, the Courtier is sober and healthy, and they pick the Shabaloth, which is one of the demons, and the Shabaloth is in play, so now the Shabaloth is drunk for 3 nights and 3 days, and cannot land any kills. The next night, night 2 of the Courtier's ability, the Sailor picks the Courtier, and you choose to make the Courtier drunk. Now the Courtier is drunk, so the Shabaloth is no longer drunk, and they can kill. Then the next night, the Courtier is sober again, the Shabaloth's drunkenness resumes, and the Shabaloth cannot kill that night. This is one where evil might mess up the bluff and say that they picked a player instead of a character, so to avoid that, if you have a large evil team that is made up of new players, maybe don't give the Courtier as a bluff. But that's totally up to you. The Professor. Once per game at night, choose a dead player. If they are townsfolk, they are resurrected. Also once per game, so once they decide to use it, they will point at a player, and if they are townsfolk, they are resurrected. The player is not told that they have been resurrected specifically, but if they act after the Professor, then they will act that night. This player becomes a new reiteration of their character, so if they had a once per game ability, they would get to use it again. If they were you start knowing ability, they would get their information again. For example, the grandmother. You would put the Professor to sleep, then immediately wake the grandmother and give them a new grandchild and all the information that comes with that. You could choose a dead player, but I would choose an alive player. If the Professor chooses a player whose turn has already passed in the night's order, they'll only get to use their ability the next night. So in the morning you will announce at the beginning of the day who died if anybody did, and then announce, and we are miraculously rejoined by Arya, and do not say why. If the player they chose is not a townsfolk, or if they are drunk, then nothing will happen and they went and used their ability. The Minstrel. When a minion dies by execution, all other players, except travelers, are drunk until dusk tomorrow. So only if the minion dies by execution. If they're executed but they don't die, the Minstrel's ability will not trigger. If you have multiple minions, it would happen once for each minion, but a dead minion getting executed again doesn't do anything because players cannot die again. If the Minstrel is drunk or poisoned when a minion is executed and dies, nothing happens. For example, the assassin is executed and dies, so everybody becomes drunk, and there's a little reminder token, and I would put it in the middle of my grimoire. The demon cannot land kills, protectors would not save anyone, the gambler would live either way, etc. Another example, the minstrel is chosen by the sailor and is drunk. The next day, the assassin is executed and dies. No one is made drunk from the minstrel because the assassin died before the minstrel's drunkenness wore off. The tea lady isn't protected. Oh, I need to actually read. The tea lady. If both your alive neighbors are good, they can't die. So the tea lady isn't protected by their ability, but if their neighbors are both good, they cannot die from the demon, the godfather, the gossip, or an execution, assassin exception. So if a player sat next to the activated tea lady is executed, you will say they're executed, but they do not die. However, if one or both of the alive neighbors of the tea lady are evil, then neither of them are protected. The ability passes through dead players. So for example, the tea lady is sat between the assassin and the chambermaid. So the tea lady's ability does not trigger. Neither are safe. Then the professor is sitting next to the assassin. The assassin is executed and dies. Now both of the tea lady's alive neighbors are good, so the tea lady's ability activates. If the tea lady is sipping on something that is not tea, then they will not be protecting any neighbors until they are sober again. The pacifist. Executed good players might not die. When a good player is executed, you will decide if they live or not. Of course, you will not tell the group why they survived. You will say Hannah is executed but does not die, and you can only have one execution per day, so the day will end. Typically, you should use the pacifist's ability once per game. You can use it 0 times, but that's kind of lame. If you put the pacifist into the game, you should use it. But if they're killed early, there's nothing you can do. You can use the pacifist's ability to save the pacifist from execution. You can also use the pacifist ability more than once, but the more you use it, the longer the game will take. But it might be necessary if evil is really winning, or people are dying really fast. The pacifist cannot be used to save good travelers from exile. What's that? What's a traveler? Well, I have a whole nother video on that you can take a look at when you're done watching this one. A drunk pacifist cannot save good players from dying from execution. The fool. The first time you die, you don't. So the first time the fool dies, for any reason, they don't. Assassin exception. They don't find out why they didn't die, they could have been protected by something else, like the tea lady. If the fool is protected by another character's ability, such as the tea lady or the innkeeper, the fool doesn't die and they save their ability. The ability is only triggered if the fool would actually die under normal circumstances. After which you can mark them with a no ability reminder token. For example, the fool is executed and they don't die. Then the next day they're executed again and they do die. Or the demon attacks the fool so they don't die, but then the next day they are executed so they do die.
Outsiders. Men, why do people litter men?
The Goon. Each night, the first player to choose you with their ability is drunk until dusk. You become their alignment. So the first player and only the first player to choose the Goon that night with their ability is drunk. So the demon targets the Goon. The demon becomes drunk, the Goon does not die, and the Goon becomes evil. You will wake the Goon, and you will show them that they are evil. You will not show them who chose them. Then put the Goon back to sleep. If the chambermaid picks the Goon, they will become drunk immediately, so you'll have to think quick on your feet because they are currently awake with you and now drunk. And the Goon will become good, so you'll wake them up and tell them that they are good. Thankfully, the chambermaid is the only character that wakes every night to learn information in the traditional sense. And if you didn't already notice that, then I'm glad I told you that. You only need to wake the Goon if their alignment changes. If they're already good and a good character selects them, you don't need to wake them and tell them that. If the assassin targets the Goon does actually die, but they still turn evil. That's how it's ruled in the manual, which I actually find interesting. I would have thought that the assassin's ability doesn't protect them from drunkenness, and the Goon's ability doesn't protect them from death. It just makes whoever's selecting them drunk. It's just by nature that the first person who selects them can't kill them because they make them drunk. But the manual specifically says that the assassin does kill the Goon, so I will rule it that way and not think too much more about it. If the Goon is drunk, then anyone who picks them won't become drunk and the Goon won't change alignment. If someone is drunk before they pick the Goon would still change alignments because that's the Goon's ability. If the storyteller picks the Goon for a character, that does not count. For example, if you made the grandchild the Goon, that would not count as the grandmother picking the Goon, that would be you, the storyteller, picking the Goon. The Goon only works at night, so if there are characters who pick the Goon during the day, it doesn't do anything. For example, there is a traveler, the matron, who picks players during the day, so if they picked the Goon, they wouldn't be drunk, because it's daytime. The Lunatic. You think you are a demon, but you are not. The demon knows who you are, and who you choose at night. So this is the one responsible for not being able to wake the demons and the minions together. The way you run this is sort of reminiscent of the drunk from Trouble Brewing. You will put the Lunatic token into the bag. You will also put the Demon token into the bag. Then whoever gets the Demon token is actually the Lunatic, and whoever gets the Lunatic token is actually the Demon. Explain this to your players before you start the game, not before you put a Lunatic in, otherwise they might be like, oh, you're telling us now because you're putting a Lunatic in. Explain it at the very beginning when you explain all the basic rules. So you'll get the tokens back from your players and you will swap the Lunatic token and the Demon token in your grimoire. And I'm sorry, I actually don't know how this mechanic works in the online version, so if you're using my videos to storytell online, I have no idea. Sorry, but I am a privileged piece of garbage who has an in-person group to play with. So on the first night, wake the actual Lunatic, the person who drew the Demon token, and pretend that they are the Demon. Show them 3 bluffs, and show them who their minions are. You do not need to show them the actual minions, you can show them anyone you want. If you choose good players, the Lunatic is more likely to figure out that they are the Lunatic. I think it's fun to show the Demon as one of the minions. Then show the Lunatic 3 bluffs. They can be characters who are in play or characters who are not in play. Next, wake the actual Demon who drew the Lunatic token. Show them the You Are token, and then whichever demon they are. Then show them the This Player Is token, the Lunatic token, and point out who the Lunatic is. Then show the demon their minions, and these will be the actual minions. Then each night before you wake the demon, you will wake the Lunatic and pretend that they are the demon. They will pick someone and obviously nothing will happen to the person they picked, but there is a reminder token for who they chose so that you can tell the demon. Then wake the demon, point to the player who is the Lunatic, show them the Lunatic token, and then point to whoever the Lunatic chose. Then the demon continues acting as normal, so they can choose to mimic the Lunatic or not. If you want, you can make the Lunatic think they are a not in play demon by putting 2 demon tokens into the bag, then when they draw their tokens and you get them back, swap one of them with the Lunatic token, and then when you wake the actual demon at night, make sure you confirm with them that there is a Lunatic in play, because they won't know because they won't have drawn the Lunatic token themselves. A drunk Lunatic is just a drunk Lunatic, nothing changes, keep acting like they are the demon, and you can leave it at that if you want. However, if you want to rule it like this, you could say that the Lunatic being drunk means that the demon will not find out who the Lunatic chose, because that's part of the Lunatic's ability and the Lunatic is now drunk. That's totally up to you. I rule it the second way, because it's more interesting. The Tinker. You might die at any time. So at any time, kill the Tinker. You can't kill them if they're being protected from death. You can choose to kill them during the day, but it's usually less interesting. I recommend killing them at night so people wonder if they died due to their own ability or something else. Either way, do not announce why they died, just announce them in the morning with all the other deaths. You can also choose to not kill the Tinker and make them look suspicious. For example, during the night, the demon attacks a protected player, so you kill the Tinker instead to hide that there was no kill. Or the Innkeeper chooses the Tinker so they can't die at night, and yes, that protects them from the storyteller's choice as well. Or the demon attacks and kills someone, you decide to kill the Tinker as well. If the Tinker is drunk, you can't kill them with their ability. The Moonchild. When you learn that you died, publicly choose one alive player. Tonight, if it was a good player, they die. So if the Moonchild chose a good player, mark them as dead with the reminder token, then the person will die tonight when you get to the Moonchild in the night order. The Moonchild must pick someone shortly after they've learned they died, whether that's in the morning or after being executed. The Moonchild can take some time to pick, they don't have to rush, and they can discuss it with the group. It is not your job to prompt them to pick someone because a storyteller should not confirm roles. If an evil player is bluffing as the Moonchild, give them a moment to speak up, but ultimately that's on them if they don't. If the actual Moonchild does not speak up, they might be new and not realize how their ability works, so remind them in private. For example, the demon kills the Moonchild. That morning, the Moonchild chooses the Minstrel. The Minstrel dies that night because they are good. Or the Moonchild is executed, but they are sitting next to the activated tea lady, so they do not die, so they do not choose anyone. Or the Moonchild chooses the assassin, but the assassin is evil, so they don't die. If the Moonchild picks the good Goon, the Goon will die, even if their alignment changes that night, because they were good when the Moonchild picked them. And the Goon won't drunk the Moonchild, because the Goon doesn't drunk people who choose them during the day. Regarding drunkenness, when the Moonchild chooses a good player, if the Moonchild was drunk when they chose the player, but they are sober when their ability triggers at night, then the player will die. If the Moonchild was sober when they chose a good player, but then they're drunk at night when their ability triggers, the player won't die. So drunkenness only matters at night when the Moonchild's ability would trigger. The Godfather. You start knowing which outsiders are in play. If one died today, choose a player tonight. They die. -1 or +1 outsider. So this changes the setup of the game. If you minus an outsider, add a townsfolk. If you add an outsider, minus a townsfolk. Either choice is a fine one. If you minus an outsider, this helps the Godfather hide because they can bluff as the missing outsider. If you add an outsider, the evil team will have to push a different narrative to hide the Godfather, but the Godfather gets more opportunities to possibly get a kill. There isn't a better or worse option. I would obviously add an outsider if the base outsider count was 0, and I would not minus an outsider if there was only one outsider, because otherwise the Godfather doesn't get to use their ability. The Godfather knows which outsiders are in play, so you'll wake them on the first night and show them all the tokens of the outsiders that are in play. The ability says if an outsider died today. Now in a custom script or with a traveler, there are other ways to die during the day, but for BMR specifically, that usually means death from execution. So if an outsider dies during the day phase, the Godfather will get to kill that night. If 2 outsiders were killed, the Godfather only gets 1 kill. For example, we have 12 players, so normally we would have 2 outsiders, but we decide to minus 1 and add a townsfolk. So we have a Moonchild in play, so on the first night we show the Godfather that the Moonchild is in play. During the day, the Moonchild is executed and dies, so the Godfather gets to kill that night. If the Godfather targets the Goon, they won't kill the Goon, the Godfather will become drunk, and the Goon will become evil. Or the Lunatic is executed, but they are protected by the Tea Lady, so the Godfather doesn't get to kill. If you kill the Tinker in the day, the Godfather would get to kill that night. If the Godfather is sober when the outsider is killed in the day, but then they're drunk at night when they would normally select their target won't die. If the Godfather is drunk when the outsider is killed, but they are sober in the night when they would select their kill, they do kill the player. The Devil's Advocate. Each night choose a living player, different to last night. If executed tomorrow, they don't die. So wake the Devil's Advocate, they choose a player, then put them back to sleep. Mark the player in your grimoire with the survives execution reminder token. Then in the day, if the player chosen by the Devil's Advocate is executed, you will announce that they are executed, but they don't die. Do not say why they didn't die. The Devil's Advocate cannot choose the same person twice in a row, even if that person wasn't executed at all, so if they try to, just shake your head, they must try again. For example, the Devil's Advocate chooses themselves. They are executed, but they do not die. The next night, they choose the Demon. The Demon is executed, but they don't die. Then the next night, they choose their fellow minion, the Godfather, but the Devil's Advocate is executed, so they do die at the end of the day. Or the Devil's Advocate chooses the Tinker. The Tinker is executed and shouldn't die, but they do anyway because you kill them with the Tinker's ability. The Judge is a traveler for Bad Moon Rising. Their ability is they can force executions to pass or fail regardless of votes. The Devil's Advocate protected player would still not die even if the Judge uses their ability because the Judge's ability forces execution, it does not force death via execution. A drunk Devil's Advocate cannot prevent anyone's death, but still wake them up to choose someone. The Assassin. Once per game at night, choose a player. They die, even if for some reason they could not. So when the Assassin uses their one-time ability, the player dies. Doesn't matter if they're Tea Lady protected, Innkeeper protected, the Sailor, the Fool, they will die. Wake the Assassin, they can shake their head if they don't want to use it. When they do use it, mark them as having no ability and mark the person they chose as dead. For example, the Assassin attacks the Sailor dies. If the Assassin attacks the Goon dies, but the Goon turns evil. If the Assassin is drunk before targeting the Goon, or anyone for that matter, the Assassin will not land the kill. The Mastermind. If the Demon dies by execution, ending the game, play for one more day. If a player is then executed, their team loses. So if the Demon dies and the game would usually end, the game actually continues. Do not announce that the Demon was killed, just say that so-and-so was executed and the game continues. The Demon's ability does not work the next night because they are dead, but everybody else's functions as normal. If no one is executed the next day, the game ends and good wins. If an evil player is executed, good also wins. If a good player is executed, evil wins. It doesn't matter if they are executed and don't die, they just need to be executed. And an exile is not an execution. If the Demon dies and 2 players are left alive, one being the Mastermind, continue for another day. Evil does not win because there's 2 players left, and good does not win because they killed the Demon. The Mastermind's ability overrides the regular win conditions. If the Demon is executed and dies, ending the game, and the Mastermind is drunk, the game ends and good wins. Some people don't like the Mastermind, they think it isn't that great of a role, but just having the Mastermind on the script is pretty useful for building worlds. I'm about to explain the Zombuul, but the Mastermind does not kick in when the Zombuul dies the first time because the first Zombuul's death does not end the game. The Demon dying must end the game in order for the Mastermind's ability to trigger. I don't really recommend putting the Mastermind with the Zombuul though. The Zombuul. Each night, if no one died today, choose a player. They die. The first time you die, you live but register as dead. So only wake the Zombuul if no one died today. If someone is executed and dies, the Zombuul does not get to kill, so don't even wake them. If a dead player is executed, dead players cannot die again, so the Zombuul would get to kill because no one died. So if no one died that day, wake the Zombuul, they pick someone, and then mark them as dead. So the first time the Zombuul dies, they register as dead. You as the storyteller will announce that they died, whether it was by execution or whether the Zombuul killed themselves at night. You'll flip their town square token over, they'll get a ghost vote, so they cannot nominate anymore. If they use their ghost vote, that's the only vote they have, and they don't count towards the 50% majority of alive players anymore. The Tea Lady's ability will pass through the once dead Zombuul. Same with abilities and custom scripts that pass through dead players, it will pass through the once dead Zombuul, and characters who must pick alive players cannot pick the Zombuul. The only difference is the Zombuul is woken up to kill if no one died that day, and they count towards alive players for the win conditions. So the game does not end when you get to 2 players because there are actually 3. The Zombuul needs to be executed and killed again for Good to win, so Good will realize this when the game doesn't end, and they will need to figure it out. The Zombuul dying via execution does count as a death that day, so the Zombuul does not get to kill on the night that they are executed and die. For example, day 1, the gambler is sitting next to an activated tea lady, so they are executed but they don't die, so the Zombuul wakes to kill. The Zombuul kills the Innkeeper. The next day, the Zombuul is executed but they don't die because they are Devil's Advocate protected. So they get to kill, the Zombuul kills themselves. The next day, the Chambermaid is executed and dies, so the Zombuul does not get to kill. Blah blah blah. On the final day, the Devil's Advocate, the Courtier, and the Moonchild are alive. The town executes the Courtier and they die, but the game continues because there's still actually 3 players left alive. Put everyone to sleep. The Courtier was executed and died, so the Zombuul will not get to kill that night. The game continues until another player dies. So the next day, if the town executes and kills somebody who is not the Zombuul, evil will win. I believe I said this earlier, but the Devil's Advocate cannot choose the once dead Zombuul because the Devil's Advocate must choose an alive player and the Zombuul is registering as dead. The Chambermaid cannot pick the once dead Zombuul, and the Tinker dying in the daytime would mean that the Zombuul does not get to kill. If you are playing with the Vodun, a traveller, the once dead Zombuul would get to vote with the Vodun. A drunk or poisoned Zombuul cannot land a kill, and if a drunk or poisoned Zombuul is killed the first time, the game will end and Good will win. If the Zombuul is killed so that they register as dead, then they become drunk or poisoned, do not announce that they are alive. But they would now register as alive, so for example, if the Zombuul was sitting next to the tea lady and then the other tea lady's neighbor was a good player, the Zombuul dies, so then it passes through to the next player and they're also a good player, the tea lady would be protecting them. But then if the Zombuul becomes drunk, then they show up as alive again to the tea lady's ability, so her neighbors would not be protected. The Pukka. Each night choose a player. They are poisoned. The previously poisoned player dies, then becomes healthy. There is a flowchart that many people find helpful, feel free to screenshot. I did not make this flowchart, I do not own it. The Pukka wakes on the first night, unlike other demons. They choose a player and that player is poisoned. Mark the player with the poisoned reminder token. Then each night after that, the Pukka chooses a new player to poison, and the previously poisoned player dies, is marked dead, and becomes healthy. So then you will take the poison reminder token and put it on the new player that the Pukka just chose. So players are poisoned when the Pukka kills them, so the Pukka can kill the fool the first time, and they can kill the sailor. Though the Innkeeper and the tea lady would prevent the poisoned player from dying, after which they would become healthy. The Exorcist prevents the Pukka from waking to poison a new person, but it does not stop the previously poisoned player from dying. If the Pukka is drunk, the player they pick to poison does not become poisoned, so they don't die the next night. If the Pukka was sober when they chose to poison a player, that player is poisoned. Then the next night, if the Pukka is drunk, the player does not die that night, and they become healthy. But the poison resumes once the Pukka is sober, and the player would die that night. Thank dog for the flowchart. Some examples. The Pukka poisons the Gossip. The Gossip dies, then becomes healthy. The Pukka chooses a new player to poison. Or the Pukka chooses the Chambermaid. The Chambermaid is poisoned and gets false information. The next night, the Innkeeper protects the Chambermaid so they don't die and they become healthy. The Pukka also chooses a new player to poison. The Pukka poisons the Sailor. That day they are executed and they do die because they are poisoned. At night, there is no previously poisoned player, the sailor wouldn't die again, so no one dies, and the Pukka chooses a new player to poison. The Pukka poisons the gambler. The next night, the Pukka is drunk, so the gambler's poison pauses and they don't die. The Pukka tries to poison the grandmother, but they don't because the Pukka is drunk. The next night, the Pukka is sober again, so the gambler's poison resumes, they die, and then they become healthy. So players become healthy after dying. This is not a thing in BMR, but in a custom script, if the Pukka poisons and then kills a player whose ability is dependent on being killed by, for example, the demon, such as the Sage, the player would get poisoned information upon their death, then they would become healthy. The Shabaloth. Each night choose 2 players. They die. A dead player you chose last night might be regurgitated. So wake the Shabaloth and they choose 2 people, one at a time. Remember that killing is sequential, so the order they are picked is important. Then mark them as dead. If you choose to regurgitate someone, they come back to life and count as a new reiteration of that character. So if they were a once per game ability, they would get to use it again. Or if they were a you start knowing ability, they would get their information again immediately after they are regurgitated. If they use their ability at night and they act after the Shabaloth, they get to act that night. If they act before the Shabaloth, then they get to act the next night. You can only regurgitate a player that the Shabaloth killed the previous night. You can't regurgitate someone that was killed 4 nights ago. The regurgitation can either be an alive player who was killed or a dead player who was attacked. If the Exorcist chooses the Shabaloth cannot kill that night, but a regurgitation can still happen. For example, the Shabaloth chose the Chambermaid and the grandmother. You mark them both as dead. The next night, you decide to regurgitate the Chambermaid. Then the Shabaloth kills the Pacifist and the Exorcist. In the morning, you will announce who died as normal, and then announce that the Chambermaid is back alive. Do not use the word regurgitate, and do not say why. Just say that they are now alive. Or the Shabaloth attacks the Exorcist and then the Tea Lady. The Exorcist was Tea Lady protected, so only the Tea Lady dies. Or if the Shabaloth instead had attacked the Tea Lady and then the Tea Lady protected Exorcist, both would have died. If the Shabaloth chooses the Exorcist and then the Goon, the Exorcist would die, the Goon would not die because the Shabaloth would now be drunk, and the Goon would become evil. You should usually only regurgitate once per game, but use your best judgment skills, it totally depends on your game. Usually you should regurgitate good players because it's to balance the fact that the Shabaloth is getting 2 kills per night, but if evil was really losing and all of the minions were dead and the Shabaloth selected their minion, I might regurgitate the minion. Totally depends on your game, use your best judgments. The Shabaloth cannot regurgitate themselves because once they're dead, they lose their ability. I don't suggest regurgitating when it comes down to the final day because the regurgitated player cannot be the demon, so then it's 50-50 and good has the advantage. The Poe. Each night you may choose a player. They die. If your last choice was no one, choose 3 players tonight. So the Poe may choose, so the Poe can either keep doing single kills or they can kill no one and then the next night they get a triple kill. So you'll wake the Poe, they can either shake their head no to skip or they select one person. If they skip, then the next night they get 3 and they must select them one at a time and they die in the order that they were selected. If the Poe was drunk when they decided to select no one, they still get a triple kill the next night. If the Poe skips a night, they cannot skip another night, they have to kill 3 the night after they skip. If the Poe is drunk when they kill 1 person, they won't die. If the Poe is drunk when they kill 3 people, none of them will die. The night after a drunk triple kill, they would still go back to choosing either no one or 1 person. The choices they make still register when they're drunk, such as choosing to kill no one. If the Poe attacked a player and they did not die, the Poe still only gets to choose 1 person or no one the next night. They do not get a triple kill. They only get it if they choose not to kill. If the Exorcist chooses the Poe, this does not count as the Poe not selecting anyone. But let's say, for example, on night 2, the Poe selected to choose no one. Then the next night, the Exorcist chooses the Poe, so they don't wake. But then the next night, the Poe would get their triple kill because the last decision they made was to choose no one. For example, the Poe skipped a night. The next night, they choose the Fool, the Gambler, and the Tea Lady. The Fool does not die because the first time they die, they don't. The Gambler doesn't die because they were Tea Lady protected, and the Tea Lady would die. I haven't really spoken about Bluffs much before. I usually give 2 townsfolk and 1 outsider, and then base it on my player's experience level, but another consideration is to give Bluffs that explain abilities. The Exorcist can cover for a no-death demon, such as the Poe. Give the Sailor or the Innkeeper to the Pukka so that they can explain why there's false information. And for the Devil's Advocates, consider the Pacifist or the Tea Lady. To balance your BMR game, don't only put in multiple death rolls, or don't only put in protection rolls. Mix them up so the game doesn't end after one day, and so it doesn't last for a million years. For example, if you put the Innkeeper, the Pacifist, the Sailor, the Tea Lady, and the Fool together, your game is going to last for a really long time. I usually don't put the Zombuul and the Mastermind together because that's just annoying for your players. I will put in execution surviving options with the Zombuul to give them more of a chance to have a kill. So for example, the Pacifist, the Tea Lady, or the Devil's Advocate. With the Zombuul possibly not getting very many kills very quickly, I probably wouldn't put them with an Exorcist, but that's subject to change based on what else I put in the bag. And now let's play a game.
This is my first setup. I had 9 players, which is 1 demon, 1 minion, 2 outsiders, and 5 townsfolk. Yes, 5. I chose the Pukka, and I chose the assassin because I put in a fair amount of protection. The gossip can also cause an extra kill, so I put in the innkeeper and the fool, so that there wouldn't be too much killing or too much surviving. I put in the professor because it's fun, and the chambermaid to give some strong information. I added the lunatic to drive my friends crazy, and I added the goon because I didn't want to add another character that could cause death, and both the tinker and the moonchild cause extra death. I put the Pukka and the Poe tokens into the bag, so my lunatic thinks they're the Poe, which is why I put Poe reminder tokens above them so that I would remember that they think they're the Poe. For the lunatic's bluffs, I showed them the chambermaid, who is in play but would probably stay hidden, and I showed them the gambler and the courtier. For Pukka bluffs, I gave sailor, gambler, and moonchild. I showed the lunatic that their minion was the fool. Now normally, you should probably show them an evil player for their minion if you want them to think they're the demon for longer. The reason I did this was because I knew my fool player and my lunatic player, and I figured that the group might actually think that them saying, oh, I'm the lunatic, and I'm actually the fool, that the group would think that that was them pulling a play and trying to, you know, double bluff or whatever. And I was right, that was a running theory for a little bit. I just understood my players, that's why I did that. Next I woke the Pukka and I showed them that there was a lunatic in play and who the lunatic was. And I showed them who their minion was. Then I woke the assassin and showed them who the demon was. The Pukka chose the goon, so the goon turns evil and the Pukka becomes drunk. The goon is not Pukka poisoned. The chambermaid chose the lunatic and the fool and got a 0. Reason being that waking to learn minion info does not register to the chambermaid because that's not part of their ability, so the lunatic waking to learn who their minion is does not count. The Pukka would wake, but the lunatic thinks they're the Poe, so I left it as a 0. If the lunatic had thought they were the Pukka and had woken up to choose someone to poison, I would have given the chambermaid a 1. The Pukka player approached the goon player almost immediately. This entire game it was such a will they won't they situation. The goon was sus of the Pukka player, thinking they may be evil, seeing as our goon was now evil, so they were trying to figure out who was on their team. The Pukka claimed to be the gambler, so they wanted to know what they were. The goon said that they were the grandmother, but that they should not gamble on him. There were so many times that I thought he was going to take a chance and tell the goon he was evil, but they both just kept going back and forth. It was both funny and frustrating to be on the outside, unable to say anything. The fool ended up approaching the lunatic on the first day, so the lunatic was immediately confused and unsure what was happening. The gossip gossiped that there's a Pukka in play, which of course is very interesting because we do have a Pukka in play. I was very proud of our gossip because sometimes players are a bit scared to gossip, but he understood the assignment and gossiped every day. The fool announced that they were the fool on day 1. The evil goon immediately started sowing chaos and said they were the grandmother and that they did not believe the fool was the fool. There were a few nominations. The fool wanted to prove they were the fool, but our goon said that wouldn't prove anything because they could just be the devil's advocate. I know the assassin was bluffing as the sailor, but they kept quiet about it. We had a player arrive at the end of the day and they became our judge. At this point, the goon was on the block and was going to be executed, so seeing as the goon was evil, I figured that I should make the judge good. So our judge is good. As I said, the goon was on the block, and in the end, they were executed, which I believe was part of their plan as I think they wanted to stay evil. The innkeeper chose the assassin and the Pukka, which are some top-tier excellent choices. I drunk the assassin because of what happened with the goon on the first night, so I didn't want to delay another potential kill for the Pukka just yet. The lunatic chose the fool. I told the Pukka this. The Pukka chose the innkeeper, so the innkeeper is poisoned, which means the assassin is no longer drunk. The assassin decided to not use their ability yet. The professor also did not use their ability. With the gossip kill, I killed the Chambermaid. I didn't want to sink the gossip kill into the fool, so Chambermaid was a strong character to lose, but I thought with the professor in play, there was a chance for the Chambermaid to come back, so fingies crossed. The gossip believed their kill might have gone off, so that it was indeed a Pukka world. Some people were building Pukka worlds, and some people were building Zombuul worlds. The Lunatic came out and said they believed they were the Lunatic. The fool backed this up, which our Goon again began to doubt them heavily. This now introduced the idea that the demon was possibly a Poe, seeing as the Lunatic had been shown the Poe token.
Hearing this, the gossip gossiped that there's a lunatic in play.
The evil Goon said that they were the grandmother and knew that the fool player wasn't the fool because they knew who the real fool was because they were shown the fool as their grandchild. The fool was nominated and put on the block, and at the end of the day, the fool had the most votes, so he was executed, but of course, he did not die. The Innkeeper chose the fool and the professor, but he was poisoned, so nothing happened. The Lunatic chose the fool, so I told the Pukka that the Lunatic chose the fool. The Pukka's poison on the Innkeeper triggered, so they died and then became healthy. The Pukka chose the gossip to poison, so then later that night, the gossip's true statements about a Lunatic being in play did not cause a kill. I kinda wish it had, because I would have killed the fool with no ability, and they would have died, and then maybe the Lunatic would have been like, oh, maybe I am the demon. The assassin declined to kill again, and the professor declined as well. The Pukka and the Goon had another meeting. They claimed Gambler and Grandmother again, but I could see it in their eyes. They so badly wanted to tell each other. They were so close to just saying, okay, fine, I'm evil. The Goon said their grandchild is the professor who is the fool, which is why they don't believe that the original fool is the fool. I think he said this because he believed the professor might be a minion. The professor said no, so the Goon said they must have been drunk or poisoned night one, and or that the professor was lying. Most of the town believed the Goon must be a minion because there was no other reason to be causing all these problems, which good on them for helping out the evil team so much. The gossip figured that the one kill from last night was their gossip again, so they were concerned that the real Poe would triple kill tonight. I can't remember right now what the gossip gossiped, but they are Pukka poisoned, so will most likely die tonight anyway. The professor nominates the Lunatic, and the Lunatic gets enough votes, so the Lunatic is executed and dies, and the game continues, so that pretty much confirms to the Lunatic that they were indeed the Lunatic. But like I said, there was a theory running around for a bit that the Lunatic and the Fool were pulling a sneaky sideways and acting confused, but that they were the actual minion and demon. So I'm happy that I know my players well enough to know that the town would think that, oh yes, those two players are capable of pulling a play like that. The professor is poisoned by the Pukka. The gossip dies from the Pukka, so the gossip doesn't go off because they're dead. The assassin doesn't use their ability again. The professor tried to resurrect the Innkeeper, but they were poisoned, which is so unfortunate, so the Innkeeper stays dead and the professor loses their ability. Most of today was discussion around which demon was in play and deciding to sleep tonight and see, so no one was executed. Unfortunately, that was a grave mistake. As we can see here, the Traveler doesn't count towards the end count, so it's as if we have 4 players. Now I didn't know if the demon had coordinated with their minion. It was possible that the assassin could use their ability on the professor, who would already die from Pukka poison, which would leave a poisoned fool, assassin, and Pukka as final 3. So I did send everyone to sleep just in case, but clearly the demon and minion had coordinated, or it was luck, because the assassin went for the fool, and the professor died from Pukka poison, thus evil won the game. This is my second setup. We had 10 players, so that is 1 demon, 2 minions, and 7 townsfolk. Now I love to add an outsider in when there's 0 outsiders, but I also know that that's something that could be metagamed about me when I storytell, because I like to do it, so I decided to not add any outsiders. AKA I did not put the Godfather into play. First I started with the Zombuul. I added the assassin, because sometimes the Zombuul won't get a kill for a while, so the assassin can help. I put in the Devil's Advocate to hopefully help stop executions to give the Zombuul more of a chance. I put in the Gambler and the Gossip for some potential killing, and then I also put the Tea Lady and the Sailor in for protection. I put the Minstrel in because I honestly don't use them that often, so again, just trying to avoid being metagamed by my players. I put in the Professor and the Chambermaid for some information gathering, and also because the Professor wasn't able to use their ability in the last game, so I was hoping that the Professor could do something real cool this time. For the demon Bluffs, I gave Pacifist, Exorcist, and Moonchild. First I woke the minions, and I showed them who their demon was. Then I woke the demon, and I showed them their minions. The Sailor drunks the Gossip. The Devil's Advocate chooses the Zombuul. The Chambermaid chose the Gambler and the Devil's Advocate, so they get a 1 because the Devil's Advocate wakes on the first night. The Tea Lady decided to take a chance and trusted the Gossip and told them that they were the Tea Lady, so they wanted to see if their ability was working. Now, mostly based on vibes, the Tea Lady and the Gossip were not convinced that the Devil's Advocate was a good player. So the Gossip gossiped that the Devil's Advocate player was evil. It started as a joke, but the Devil's Advocate player is evil, so that was pretty funny. And there was no execution that day, which is excellent for our Zombuul. The Sailor picked the Professor, so I made the Professor drunk. The Gambler gambled the Minstrel as the Minstrel, and they're correct, so they don't die. The Devil's Advocate chooses the Assassin. There was no execution, so the Zombuul gets a kill. They target the Sailor, but the Sailor doesn't die. The Assassin kills the Minstrel, so I mark the Minstrel as dead, and the Assassin as having used their ability. The Professor saves their ability. No one was executed the previous day, so they wouldn't know who they could raise from the dead anyway, which is good because they are drunk. The Gossip kill goes off and it kills the Tea Lady. This was a hectic night. I was close to killing the Assassin with the Gossip kill, but decided to kill the Tea Lady instead because the Zombuul did not even get their kill. But I figured the Tea Lady was fine, plus we have a Professor, so that's really powerful for the town. The Chambermaid chose their neighbours again, so they got a 2, because both the Devil's Advocates and the Gambler woke. I heard that the Professor was planning to bring the Tea Lady back, so that's really good for them. The Gossip gossips that it is possible for the Tea Lady to come back to life with the roles that are currently in play. So that is true, as we have a Professor in play who has their ability. The Devil's Advocate was under lots of suspicion today, based on vibes and also the belief that the Gossip kill went off. The gossip was that the Devil's Advocate player is evil, which was true. So the Professor nominates the Devil's Advocate, they got enough votes, and so they are executed. The Sailor chose the Gossip, so I made the Gossip drunk. The Gambler gambled the Sailor as the Sailor, which is correct. The Zombuul did not get a kill because the Devil's Advocate was executed that day. The Professor chose the Tea Lady, so the Tea Lady came back to life. The Tea Lady's ability also kicked into gear, and so the Gossip and the Chambermaid were safe from death. The Chambermaid chose the Gossip and the Zombuul, so they got a 0. I made a small mistake here for some reason. I had some kind of brain fart, I guess, but I did quickly quote-unquote undo it in the morning. What happened was I saw the Gossip was Sailor drunk, but for some reason in my brain I was like, oh, well I will have the Gossip kill go off anyway. But they aren't an info roll. I don't know why in that moment I was thinking about info rolls, because you can choose to give good info to a drunk player, but you cannot decide that an ability should just happen. So I marked the Professor as dead from the Gossip kill. The Professor acts before the Gossip kill goes off, so the Tea Lady would come back either way. But then as I woke everyone up in the morning, I announced that the Professor had died and that the Tea Lady was back. Then my brain clicked back into place, and I realized that the Gossip kill cannot have gone off. I passed it off as me being dumb, which is true. So I just said pretty much in the exact same sentence, oh wait, the Professor player is not dead. So it happens to the best of us. If you can fix it by just going, oh, oops, wait, I misspoke, then do that. My Zombuul made a side comment to me about thinking they were the Lunatic because they tried to kill the Sailor and they didn't die. I did remind them that there are plenty of characters that prevent death, and he seemed like that satisfied him. Plus I had seen them speaking with their minions and talking strategy, so I thought everything was lacquer and hunky-dory. Foreshadowing? More on that later. The Gossip gossips that the Assassin player is evil, which is crazy because that is true and our Assassin was not really under any suspicion in particular. The town decides to execute the Gossip, which was part of their plan, because they don't die, because they are Tea Lady protected. So now there is a big circle of trust between the Tea Lady, Chambermaid, Gossip and Professor, so that is very strong for good. The Sailor chooses the Gossip yet again. I decided to drunk the Sailor because he's chosen the Gossip 3 times now, and I wanted my Gossip to know that they were correct about the Assassin. I also figured that with the Chambermaid and the Gossip being safe from death, that it would help balance if the Sailor wasn't also safe. The Gambler gambles the Gossip as the Gossip, which is correct. The Zombuul chooses the Sailor. The Sailor is actually drunk, so they do die, and I thought that was quite lucky for the Zombuul, But turns out it was bad. Hindsight 2020. More foreshadowing, more on that later. The gossip kill goes off, and I kill the gambler with it. The chambermaid chooses the Zombuul and the gossip, so they get a 1. So, here's what happened with our Zombuul. They come out as they are convinced that they are the lunatic. At first I thought maybe this was a play. They were saying, oh yes, I'm the lunatic, but then they just kept going and they also outed their minions. So clearly they did actually think they were the lunatic. Reason being, the sailor didn't die the first time, but this time the sailor did die, so that was quite unfortunate. But the game doesn't actually end quite yet, so let's keep going. The gossip gossips that the Zombuul player is the lunatic. So the Zombuul is nominated and is on the block, but the Zombuul still believes they are definitely the lunatic. They say they think that the sailor is the actual once dead Zombuul, and so they're dead because they killed themselves in the night. This is plausible. Enough people jump on that nomination, so the sailor actually got more votes than the Zombuul. So they were executed again, but they don't die again. But the game continues, which pretty much solidifies that the Zombuul is the actual Zombuul, and that they are not the lunatic. But hey, at least the Zombuul does get a kill. The Zombuul decided to kill themselves, so they aren't really dead, but I think at this point too many people believed he was the actual Zombuul, and it was mostly just for fun now. The gossip was wrong, so no one dies. I don't actually remember who the chambermaid chose, but it would be a 0 no matter what, because everyone who is alive does not wake. I announced that the Zombuul player died. Everyone immediately wants to nominate him. I wish I could have done more to help, but he really shot himself in the foot. Now, part of BMR and being the demon is that paranoia that you could be the lunatic. It's part of the social deduction aspect of the game and putting the puzzle together. So when the demon came up to me and said they thought they were the lunatic because their target did not die, and I reminded them that there are many players who may not die, that is about as much info as you should say. Your instinct may be to tell the demon that they are definitely the demon, but the lunatic being on the script is part of the puzzle. If your demon thinks they are the lunatic, then it is up to them to think, okay, who could the demon be then if it's not me? And then to go and talk to their minions and figure it out and trust who they want to trust. I am not saying this to shame this player. Anything can happen to anyone. Our group was very supportive of our poor Zombuul. This was still a very fun game that lasted quite a long time. I am sharing this to show you that this can happen and that it is not your job to reveal the puzzle to your demon, especially in BMR. And also, if anyone out there is a player, if you think you're the lunatic, be careful. This is also another reason why BMR is not for beginner players. So I hope this helps someone in the future. I haven't had this happen before, but sometimes shenanigans and doubts happen, and that's okay.
And that is all. Let me know if you have any questions and I will answer.